Okay, hello everybody. Haven't started yet, working on getting things set up, but just as a heads up, we will be getting started in 15 minutes. So until then, just hang tight. Also, I will be testing things out, so just hold on and bear with me. We haven't actually started. Eat. Hello, one viewer. Don't know if I know who you are, but hello. Erin, you're cool. No worries. Nah, you're not late at all. You're all right. Don't worry about it. I like that. I like the being early thing. Feels a little bit weird because I can't see you, but I like that you're early. You're one of the cool kids. You're fashionably early. That's what it is. Okay, is it Sherry or Shari? I can't quite tell. I want to say her name right. And I don't want to just call you that person from Massachusetts, because that's even more awkward than Google Hangout small talk. For real. And it's okay if that's your hobby. My hobby apparently is like just smiling at the screen and like waiting for a minute. So you're all good. So to everyone else who has shown up for now, a little bit early. So for now, I'm just going to kind of like stare at you guys. And oh, Sherry, good. Okay. So hi, Sherry. I'm gonna just like awkwardly stare at you guys for a little bit, and we're gonna wait to see who else is here, and then we're gonna get started. As promised, Mountain Dew. So we're ready to go. Steven, is there a back channel for chat? I don't think so. Maybe I can pull up my chat. I don't see it. But I'm totally cool with just using that question and answer part as being a little chat. That's okay, fine by me. Hi, Melissa. It's very awkward to like not actually hear you guys. That's the awkward part. Small talk I'm cool with. The not being able to actually hear you is the awkward one. All right, so I have 10 o'clock over here. So we're going to go ahead and get started, and I will meander a little bit so that if people are trying to find their way over, they can find it and join us, and it can be great. Okay, so we are in gamifying assessment. If you are in the session you did not mean to be in, stay anyway. Hang out, have a good time with us. So I did just talk to a number of you in the gamification chat. I am a Classcraft user, so if you ever want to talk about that, I got you. Tonight, though, we're focusing specifically on gamifying assessment. So what that's going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit less about exactly how Classcraft and things worked in our classroom and talk a bit more about gamifying assessment itself and how that works, whether it still counts as assessment. In my class, we use something called boss battles, which I'll explain in a bit if you are not already a gamer. But we use boss battles specifically in our class, and does that still count as assessment, or is it something entirely different, or how does that work? So what we're going to do to start off is I'm going to, sorry, my question and answer people, you had lovely introductions. I'm going to erase your questions so we can make a little bit of room so it's not too hard for me to see and everything. And then we will get a crack-a-lackin'. Alrighty, Roo. I'm going to share my screen with you so you can see our beautiful presentation that I put all of my waking hours into making just for you. And it should be up. If it is not, please let me know. Don't feel afraid to tell me. Okay, so tonight, gamifying assessment, focusing specifically on how do we take gamification and apply it to assessment so students don't go from their quests and being heroes to suddenly it's their Scantron test. Because it's a little bit of a disconnect, and there's a lot that we can learn from gamification that can help with assessment. So a little bit about me first. As a side note, if you hear a barking dog, that is my lovely dog Gatsby. He is a sweetheart, except when I'm talking. So if you hear a dog, I apologize. So I'm Mallory. I am an English teacher at Walnut Hills High School, Cincinnati, Ohio. Last year I taught 8th grade English at Logan Hocking Middle School in Logan, Ohio, about 3 hours east. I am also the founder of Game Index, our nice little fancy logo up at the top. At Game Index, we review video games and tabletop games for teachers to use and give ideas of how you can use that. So that's more game-based learning, and that is later tonight. That is not this session right now. So you can also find me at Mallory Kesson or Mallory Kesson at gameindex.org for later on. Okay, so first thing is I actually want to get your input. What is an assessment, and what does something need to be an assessment? Our chat is weird because it's a Google Hangout on air. So if you want to submit it as the question in a question and answer, you can do that. But I want to kind of get your input and see where you're at. So what do you consider an assessment to be, and what does something need to be an assessment? So I'll give you a minute to type. What is an assessment, and what does it need? What do you guys think? Okay, Melissa says, an assessment is an evaluation or check that students met objectives and standards set out for them. Okay. Yes, Steve. People are typing questions in the question or typing in the question area because not everybody can see the chat, which I don't know if the chat is actually working for this. So question and answers does work. Sharon says it's something that helps her steer instruction. Mitzi, I hope I said that right. An assessment can be a variety of items used to measure what students learn. Debbie, assessment can help direct instruction. So yeah, if we're talking formative assessment, nice. Assessment is ideally something that shows what students know and what they're able to do. Very nice. So yeah, Sherry says the majority of her assessments are in writing instead of multiple choice. So depending on your content area, it will all be different. So generally what I'm getting from everybody's answers is we see assessments as ways to measure if students have understood the objectives. So already a pretty good broad definition. Brittany said that an assessment needs to have credibility and have the same objective or skill being covered. Awesome. So what is about to follow are four criteria for assessments that you are more than welcome to disagree with. That's fine. So if you see like standards, for example, in there are standardized, don't panic. You're more than welcome to disagree with what these are. But when I was looking for what most people say assessments are, they all tended to include these 4 items. So our first one being that it's consistent. So consistent standards for every student. What that means is that if we have, using some of our attendees, we have Steve and Sherry. Steve isn't being held to a completely different standard than Sherry is. Now, I totally get that things like IEPs or students with special needs, that's a whole different ballgame. But that in assessments, we're looking at something that's consistent, something that it should be expected what the students are supposed to do for that assessment. Second one is that it's valid. This covers a lot of what you guys were saying in your responses. So if it's valid, it tests the materials that you're actually covering. So it's not, since I'm an English teacher, it's not like we cover plot in class and then on the test I ask about allusions and allegory and metaphor and all that crazy stuff. We want to make sure that it's something that the students are actually going to be able to understand what has been covered through the test. It's reliable, so students score roughly the same each time, like regardless of if they take it in the morning, they take it in the afternoon. If, I don't know, there is a giant dinosaur attacking them or not, they will be able to score roughly the same each time. And then finally, this is something that isn't always considered in the textbook definition, but is something that's equally important, is that it's individual, so it can assess an individual's skills. Even if you have a group project, for example, that you're using as their assessment, there should be some way to assess what the individual is doing or what the individual has learned, so they can't like hide behind the smart kid in class. As bonuses, it's great if they include this, but they don't all do this. Bonuses, an assessment can include student interest, it's something meaningful, and it's something painless. So it's something that's not going to stress kids out to the point that they can't even take the test. Or assessment, excuse me. So bearing those things in mind, what are some kinds of assessment you guys typically think of? So if you hear someone talking about assessment, whether it's for your classroom or in general, what are some items that you usually think of? So you can go ahead and type that now. Okay, Steve said it is often in terms of reflection, as did Terry. So reflection is definitely a big help for assessment. Now, I will talk about that a bit with my the boss battles that we did for class. So what are some other types of assessment you think of? Final project? Good. Hooray, boss battles, says Stan. So, okay, I think Stan's thinking boss battles already. I like that. Beth said essay. Girl, as an English teacher, I'm totally with you there. Essays all the time. And yes, you could say tested quiz. That's okay. Okay, Stan also does formative assessments like exit tickets. Good. And I'll talk a bit about that too. Okay, so I think we have a pretty good list of like what comes to mind typically when we think of assessments with tests, quizzes, essays, final projects, reflections. Just off the top of my head, these were some of the assessments that I have seen and that usually come to mind for me. Some of them very standard, like first one right off the bat, people think test. I also did a portfolio last year with my kids as a overall for the year assessment, which worked very well for them. But what I want to think about now is how can gamification fit into doing these assessments? So what about gamification can separate a new kind of assessment from things that have been done before? So the first thing I want to do, I know a number of you were in the gamification session last session, but I just want to get a basic definition of gamification so there's no mistake about what we're talking about. So gamification is applying game principles to a traditionally non-game setting. School, a very traditionally non-game setting, for example. So things that you can do in a gamified class, you level up, earn points, and in this case, you can fight bosses. Those are all three things that my students did last year in our gamified class. It is not the same as game-based learning, and I want to be clear about that because there's a lot of confusion that happens there typically. Game-based learning, you use the games as the materials for your class. Gamification, you use the ideas of game design to create a different culture in your class, to create a new environment for your students. So some resources if you're interested in gamification, 3D Game Lab, Class Dojo, and Classcraft. I personally use Classcraft. Highly recommend it. Highly recommend all three. So my classroom specifically, just to tell you a little bit about where I taught last year, rural Ohio, a little bit conservative. I was at Logan Hawking Middle School. I had two classes that added up to 45 students. They were 8th graders, 13 to 14 years old. Not all of them were gamers. Actually, most of them were not. But they were all pretty much still very involved in using Classcraft and in following along with what we were doing there. So in our classroom, we did boss battles. And this came about after one of my students actually asked me, Ms. Kesson, if we have a gamified class, why aren't we doing boss battles? That seemed like the next logical step. So I want to share with you guys one of the boss battles that we created. So in this boss battle, students had just finished their poetry unit, and they had to fight a boss, a villain of some kind. So for people who aren't familiar with games, a boss battle is the final villain that the hero faces and goes against. And they have to use typically all of their skills that they have amassed over the game to fight and defeat this person. Sounds pretty assessment worthy to me. Using skills that you've amassed, applying them all to a setting, judging whether or not you've actually mastered those skills, sounded pretty assessment worthy. So in this boss battle, typically what would happen is students would come into my classroom. We would have boss battle music playing. So I would just have a playlist from YouTube of all these different songs from boss battles to really like enhance the tension and the mood to get them interested and really involved in it. They would take their seats. They would quickly strategize with their team, who were doing things like protecting, who was going to be healing, when that was going to be happening, so on and so forth. Then what we would do, and I normally wouldn't tell them who the boss was until the day that we were actually going through it. What would happen then is we would have a little bit of a story just to pull them in. Story can do so much for pulling kids into what you're going to be doing. So in this case, we had the lights go out, leaving the class in darkness. A laugh echoes to the right of the class. A voice sings to the left. In the dark, a man materializes in front of the class and cackles. He bows slowly, then stands, a gleam of wickedness in his eyes. And yes, for anyone who watches it, that is Rumpelstiltskin from Once Upon a Time, would always credit the artwork, would always credit where images came from, so on and so forth. Then they get a little introduction from the boss himself. Well, well, dearie, such a pleasure to meet you. You've made such progress, but I'm afraid your journey ends here. And for a little bit of laughs, they always get a different name. So he was Rymian because boss of the poetry unit. And they have HP. So with their health points, the goal of the boss battle for students is to bring those health points for the boss down to 0. I was always the one who would set it. I would set it based on the number of questions they were being asked and the number of essays that they were going to be doing. So this is how it worked with their boss battles. Everyone had individual answer sheets so that way it became something that even if you miss that day of class, I give you an answer sheet and a paper copy of the test, and you can still take it. With the individual answer sheets too, it takes away a little bit of the possibility that you're just hiding behind your group who knows the answer, and it also is a record for me to keep track of and to actually grade. So when a question would be posted, they'd have 30 seconds after it was read to choose their answer and write it on their magic parchment. Following along with the idea that it was magic parchment, they were not allowed to erase or mark out their answer after you write it, or it negates the effect. Part of the reason for doing this was to cut down on possible cheating. So just looking at the realistic side. So question we read, they'd have 30 seconds. Usually wouldn't need that whole time. Rymian would attack a random student. So I would call on a random student, and they would have to answer correctly. If they answer correctly, they got to roll a dice and see how much damage they dealt. If they answer incorrectly, the boss attacks them. Something that we added later on, because students wanted the chance to be able to help their team, was that they could dodge their attack if a teammate had the correct answer. But they only had one shot, so they had to pick someone who was confident that they had the right answer. Because if they missed, whole team took damage. So it was kind of a little bit of risk reward. They could also use one ability after each round. So especially for my teams who maybe would lose all of their own health from being attacked, that was a good opportunity for them to gain that health back and still be in the game and not feel like they were just taken out completely. One thing that, this is actually a student's recommendation, was that bosses have a special ability. And so Rymian was our first boss who had a special attack of his own. So he had what was called heart theft. So his special ability was that the next player he attacked would have to take the full damage amount, which would be 15 HP, and they were not allowed to be healed or heal other people for the rest of the battle. So it was a really big deal for students who wanted to stay in the game. So then this is what we would come to, and this whole presentation was simply made using Google Slides and using links to different slides to get to the questions. So in our first question, for example, which of the best definition is setting? Sorry. Which of the following is the best definition of setting? Is it A, what happens in a story, B, the time and place of a story, C, the message of a story, or D, a dragon? Question 1 would always be something that I would sincerely hope they could get right off the bat. What I would like you guys to do is answer that question. So in our Q&A, I want to see if you have the right answer and if you would be able to defeat Rymian. So take a second. Which of the following is the best definition of setting? Is it what happens, the time and place, the message, or is it a dragon? Okay, Angela said B, the time and place of a story. Congratulations, team. Angela got it correct. So Angela does damage to Rymian. So we would hit success. There'd be some face of our boss being all angry because he just got hit. We would roll for damage. I always carried a dice with me so that we could just roll. Typically, I used a dice from the game Betrayal at House on the Hill, which has 0, 1, or 2 dots or pips on the side. So if it was 0, they got 5 damage, 1, they got 10, 2, they got 15. Could easily be applied to a normal kind of dice as well. So then we would go back and we would answer our next question. And if you think that all the questions were that simple, they weren't. So question 14, which of the following is the best definition of a metaphor? The rest of these questions, aside from the first one, always put into, hate to say it, always put into park format. Because in park, they'd be a little bit tricky. You'd have part 1 and part 2 questions, and it was the first time the students had seen that. So this was a way to introduce the park questions in a way that wasn't intimidating for the students, and in a way that could give them a chance to think about it and to really focus on what they were answering, instead of panicking over the Scantron version or the normal paper version. So let's say that we said a metaphor is when you say something again and again. Okay, then you would miss. So there'd be some image. I've used, for other bosses, I've used Smaug from The Hobbit. I've used Hades from Hercules, a number of different characters. Kids love it when they see someone they recognize. So Rymian would do his own attack, and then we would treat again back to the questions. So sometimes you might have seen that there was the 1 and 2 at the bottom of the screen. What that is that's something unique that happens in the middle of the game, something to be a little twist. So for example, if you click 1, which would be whenever I decided they had been chatting with their teammates too much. You talk too much, dearies. Looks like your powers come at a price. With a flick of his wrist, you suddenly lose the ability to communicate with your team. And I had to say communicate because they would end up writing the answers back and forth instead of just instead of talking and everything. So they would lose the ability to communicate. So they were on their own for answering some of those questions. Another one that easily could have happened was after they got through all 20 questions, I would move to number 2. And number 2 would always mark a change in the game where they're changing from one type of question to the next. So all of a sudden, Rymian steals the Game Master's heart. If you are familiar with Classcraft, you know who the Game Master is. If you are not familiar with Classcraft, the Game Master is the teacher. So the Game Master stole my heart. And the Game Master was not allowed to help anyone until I got my heart back. So what that meant was students were on their own for answering their essay questions. They couldn't ask me for help. So then they would have certain actions associated with their short answer, their essays. Again, I taught English, so that's why it was a little bit easier for me to create these essays. If you have something else you would rather have them do, you are more than welcome to. Go for it. So to distract Rymian, they would have to complete an analysis of a poem, and then they had to write about what the theme was and why they thought it was a theme. Then they would have to unleash the heart. So give me my heart back, basically. They had to decide which poem wins our Poetry March Madness and give their reasons. And then they always get one last saying about what's happening to the boss. The boss is dying. You need to finish him off, something to pump him up right before their final question. And following the idea that assessment should also be reflective, their final finishing blow was always something reflective about the unit we were on. So what did they learn? What did they have questions on? What did they like the most? What did they like the least? So their finishing blow was always reflective. So then they would go turn their papers in. And typically the way I would assess the essays was more in walking around and just making sure people were actually writing, we're working on them, that kind of thing. It was a bit more lenient on how the essays were going to go because I couldn't grade them then and there and see how they were. So usually if they got through the whole thing in the class period and they had been focusing and working hard, considered it beating the boss. So then they'd see the boss died and something would happen to the boss, usually get tossed in jail or they would run away. And then would finish off with the 8th grade was free to adventure and explore once more, and to celebrate the great heroes, the whole town gave them 1,000 XP. In Classcraft world, that means everybody levels up. And in my classroom, that also meant that everybody got back to full HP. So it was something that was really exciting for them to accomplish and to get through, despite how long it was. So that was typically what our battles would entail. Little bit long and everything, but it was something that the kids actually looked forward to. And I don't know if I've ever seen a kid look forward to an assessment before. So, is it assessment? Okay, well, let's look at the 4 traits we talked about and compare that with our boss battle. Consistent. Students needed to get X number of questions right to hurt or defeat the boss. So they needed to be able to get most of the questions right in order to defeat him. That was just how the math played out. We never had a day where we got to the essays and the boss was still at 300 HP or something. It was always the boss was actually like on his last legs, and he was about to be defeated. Is it valid? The questions from the test are exactly the same as they appear in a paper version, and it's also exactly what we covered in class. So we would cover exactly the same material. It was set up in a park format, so it was the same format that it would have been. Following along with if it was reliable. Both students in both bells performed the same. And again, I noticed that students who took the paper version of the test and students who took the boss battle version of the test did roughly like the same. So regardless of like which format, it still worked for the assessment overall. And finally, if it was individual, the students had individual answer sheets. So they had individual methods of answering. So they couldn't necessarily hide behind the one kid on their team that knew all the answers. So then what makes it different? So traditional tests, these are just a couple attributes that you see in traditional tests. One is that it's entirely individual. Okay, well, with a boss battle, there is some teamwork. When I lost my heart in that last boss battle, my students were allowed to work with each other on one of the responses. The poem that they analyzed was a Shakespearean sonnet, and it was their first time seeing Shakespeare. So they were welcome to work on it together, and it was something where they were able to bring up everybody's collective writing skills by working together on it. There's also the teamwork in that they can help each other out so that if one person gets the wrong answer, then at least their team can help save them from getting that damage. Is it silent? Nope. There is game music going on in the background. It's always a little bit chaotic because students are strategizing about who's using their powers when and what's going on. So it's not that same silent, tense atmosphere. It's tense for a totally different reason in that they were immersed in what's going on. The pressure from testing. I've seen students from the pressure of just a normal test, not even standardized, a normal test, end up crying, bursting into tears, unable to finish. In a boss battle, it's not that stressful. There is the pressure of making sure that you're answering to help your team out, but it's not the pressure of, oh God, I have to do so well on this so that I pass my class so my parents aren't mad, so on and so forth. That becomes secondary. What they're more focused on is we have this common enemy that we have to defeat and we're going to do it. And finally, traditional tests typically stand alone, but our boss battles fit into our class's overall storyline and the overall feel of our class. My students came into my classroom every day as heroes through Classcraft. They came in as heroes, they had the opportunity to do quests, and so it made sense that they were able to do these boss battles and fight these villains and work together on that. And more importantly, this is the number one thing that matters to me in the terms of the difference I saw. One of my students came up to me after one of our boss battles and said, "Ms. Kesson, we should have more boss battles." I was using them as a form of assessment. I have never heard a kid say we should have more tests, we should have more quizzes. Even with projects, I've heard kids say like, this is pretty cool, we should do this instead of things more often. But he flat out said we should have more boss battles because it was something that they felt engaged with and it was something they felt like they had some ownership over. So what were some changes that I noticed in my class? One, like I said before, was there was less stress and anxiety. My kids were excited for test day. They would see on the board, I would always make it something mysterious, like something wicked this way comes, and they would know, okay, boss battle day, and they would know to get ready for it. But they would come in excited and ready to go instead of dreading it or panicking last minute or anything like that. They demanded more assessment. They wanted to see more. They wanted to have more of that engagement. And the students became content creators. A lot of the changes that happened between our first boss battle against Smog and our last boss battle against Hades were from the students. They said, we want a different way that damage is dealt. We want it to be more random. We want there to be a little bit of story added in. So they came up with these things, and when they saw it implemented, they not only felt like their opinions were heard and that their opinions mattered, but they also felt like they were the ones that were in control of what was happening. Okay, I was still coming up with the questions and the answers and everything, assessing if they've met the objectives and the standards, but they felt like they had a say in how it was going down, how it was happening. So a couple changes though for this year, based on some things that I saw. So I want to incorporate a couple more story elements, and we talked earlier. We mentioned earlier things like the exit slips and quizzes. I want to find ways to bring that boss battle element down to that level. So for your closing activity, there's a I tried this with Midsummer Night Dream. There would always be a monster from Greek mythology that would attack, which also led to a discussion about why that monster, what's the allusion, what's the reference that Shakespeare's making to that monster. For quizzes, having a mini boss, which is just someone bigger than a monster, but not as big as your final boss that you face along the way on your journey. So having a mini boss for quizzes. I would love to have a storyline involving all of the monsters so that they feel like they're working up toward something that is greater. And if you work with older students than my 8th graders from last year and my 7th graders this year, focus more on that idea of content creation if you think they're not going to buy into a storyline about it. Or focus on having them help create the story and help be involved in the design. But for my little guys, they're cool with that. Boss health, I want to find a way to get a class average. So especially for things like the mini bosses or the monsters, having the class needing to score at least at 8% average to pass and to defeat that boss. Otherwise, I know we need to reteach it. And finally, I wanted to find a way to do more accurate records while we're doing our boss battles, so that a student couldn't go back and just change their answer or anything like that. So I'm actually looking into using Nearpod, which allows you to create presentations that are interactive, and you control the pace of them for your students, and it takes records of them in real time. So I could see 10 of the kids got this question wrong. Okay, so then that's probably going to be a question that the whole class didn't get right for facing that boss. So those are going to be some of the changes that I make for my boss battles and for that assessment. So, whoops, real quick. I want to give you guys that experience of being in the middle of a boss battle. So what's going to happen is, if you've been listening to our beautiful presentation, you're going to have a couple questions that you have to answer. And if you tuned in late or you weren't quite here for the first part, you can also go back and check and see if you can find some of the answers. So we're going to face our own boss, and we're going to have our own experience. So suddenly, your screen flickers and the session cuts out. When the screen returns, our group has an extra attendee cackling and grinning. It's Ignoramus, aka Plankton from SpongeBob. If you can answer my 3 questions, your training shall reach completion. But if you cannot answer my riddles 3, you will be forced into eternal PD. Ignoramus has 30 health. Your directions are to work together to answer the 3 questions about this session and defeat Ignoramus, the hater of all things learning. So, you guys ready for your first question? Question 1. What is gamification? You can type your answer into our lovely question and answer box. What is gamification? So what is gamification? You do not want ignoramus to defeat you. All right, that said, gamification is using the elements of gaming in a non-gaming environment. That is correct. So, ignoramus loses 10 HP for getting that question right. Next one. Name 3 attributes of an assessment. So what were 3 of the 4 attributes that we talked about? Okay, Sherry said consistent, valid, and reliable. That is correct. So, ignoramus drops down to 10 HP. You guys are on fire. Last question. Name 2 potential benefits of gamifying assessment. What are 2 potential benefits of gamifying our assessment? Looking for 2 potential benefits. Okay, I see students' anxiety reduced from Sherry, so I need one more. What else besides students' anxiety being reduced? Engaged students make assessment fun from Steve. That's enough to bring you guys to the win. No, you foiled my plot. You've clearly learned quite a lot. You don't always have to make the bosses rhyme. Ignoramus loses his internet connection and vanishes completely. The educated heroes have saved the day and are rewarded with an invitation to network with the best and the brightest at EdCamp Global. Congratulations, guys. You just won your first boss battle. So that's just kind of an idea of like what it's like to go through it, and just some of the ways that instead of doing a basic survey at the end or a question like a basic quiz question, something like that, it makes it a little bit more fun and more interactive for students to play along. So are there any questions? I've seen them along the way. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can actually see you guys and you can see me. And I will answer some of the ones that I see. So hello, for everyone who didn't see me earlier. So some of the questions. Beth asked, would my grades in class reflect the individual score sheets? And yes, they would. So depending on how the students did on the score sheets was the grade that they would receive on that assessment. So for the most, because I added in the idea of if you erase your answer or if you cross it out and add a new one, the kids basically stayed away from that. So they just kind of went with whatever their first impulse was and what they had first thought about. And it actually made them think harder about what they were writing down instead of just scribbling down the first letter they thought of. So yes, grades would in class would reflect those individual sheets. Do I have my slide shared? Angela asked. I do. I can post the link afterward and I'll use the gamification hashtag. I am totally okay with you guys using that setup because it takes forever to set up. So if you would like to, go for it. But, please reference that you got it from me. So yes, I will be sharing those slides after the session. Renee, which age groups have you trialed this with? Do I think it would work in a senior secondary? So last year I did it with 8th graders. This year I'm going to be working on it with 7th graders, so more on the younger side. However, I do think it would work well with seniors as well because it's something different that they haven't seen before, and it's something that they have expertise on. I guarantee you, if you ask your students about gaming or boss battles or anything, you'll have some of those kids that just want to talk all day about it. So I do think it would work well for them. And I think it's something that is unique and engaging enough that students who don't usually play games will still be interested in joining in. Trying to see where some of our other questions are because it's a little bit long. Melissa mentioned that it could be used with a Google form, and you could use it with, oh dear, Flubaroo, something like that. And it would make it easier to give feedback. Yes. One thing I'm really excited about with Nearpod too is that in Nearpod I can see the individuals answering and everything. And so I can see what they have to say, and I can see what if they've gotten the answer right or wrong and how many of them have. Yeah. Sherry, boss battles took 1 class period. That's it. If they had to take longer, students actually lost more of the reward that they would have to receive. I had one instance where it took into the next day, and so students lost half the XP that they would have otherwise received. So they typically take 1 class period, and they were usually between 20 to 30 multiple choice questions, and then 3 essays that they would work on, short response essays. Ditto with that. Part 1 and part 2 was, part 1 would be the multiple choice, and part 2 was the essays. So I hope that helps out. Oh, you're welcome, Angela. Happy to share. Happy to help. I mean, it's something that I get excited about and passionate about, so I'm happy to help share and everything. No worries. Look at Socrative.com too. Very easy for BYOD. Will do. Sounds good. So for the rest of the time, if you have no more questions, please feel free. I won't be hurt if you peace out and you head over to the next session you want to go to. If you still have questions, go ahead and ask. I'm going to keep scrolling through my lovely question and answer to see if there are any questions I haven't answered. If you enjoyed this session and my very lovely excited voice and face, I'm also doing a session in an hour and 15 minutes, roughly, at midnight Eastern time, 11 Central, on benefits and challenges of game-based learning. And so I would be happy to talk more about games and everything and games and education then. If you're interested in talking about Classcraft at all, feel free to mention, tweet to me, hit me up, whatever you want to do. Happy to help. So for people who are heading out, have fun. Enjoy EdCamp Global. Thanks for hanging out. For people who have questions, I will gladly answer. Oh, Terry, I'm sorry if you asked a question. I will look for it, but if you could repost it, that would be great. Beth, did I use side quests in the in Classcraft? If you're referring to the quests they have up there that are the timer and everything, I didn't. But for the side I did have a bounty board where students could take on additional work or additional things. And they would get extra XP or extra credit. It was up to them. Surprisingly, a lot of them chose to have extra experience points instead of extra credit. That was them. So I used those. And I think pictures of my bounty board are up, floating around somewhere on the Classcraft forums. Oh, you're welcome, Mitzi. Happy to help. Oh, there it is, Terry. So do I level the entire class up at one time? Yes. What you can do in Classcraft is you can actually select all the students who are receiving experience points, and you can give them a certain amount of experience points. So I would select the whole class, or at least everyone who was there for the boss battle. If a student for example, took the test the next day, they didn't get the experience points because they weren't there for the battle. So I would level them all up at one time for that, because it was something that was always really exciting for them and something that was really, really interesting for them to do. And typically in Classcraft for the rest of the year or for normal days, it would take about a week and a half or 2 weeks for a student to level up. So it took them a while to get up higher. So having that whole class level up thing was a great reward for them for doing well in the boss battle. So I hope that helped. Yeah, and for everyone who loved the battle and the music, like the battle music and the assessment, it really made the environment different. Something that was fun for them to use. And no lyrics. So it was easier for them to focus. Okay, I think I've gotten everyone's questions. If anyone else has any other questions, let me know. I am looking through. And so far, there's a lot of excitement about boss battles, but I'm not seeing any more questions. So sweet. Think people got this. Oh, thank you, Beth. I appreciate that. Hope I can see you there in the next session too. Sherry, if you want to, I have other examples of the boss battles that I would be happy to share and show how it's grown. And I would always be happy. I will probably be posting like an update somewhere on how boss battles go this year and everything. So would be happy to help. And actually, that goes for anyone. If anyone would like help with implementing the boss battles in their school or anything, or in their classes, I've gone through the challenges and have found ways around them. So if you want any help with doing that, you can direct message me on Twitter at Mallory Kesson, and you'll see me floating around EdCamp Global, or you can just email me as well. So whatever would help you out. Yeah. Okay, so I think I got everybody. So I'm going to head out so that I can actually let my dog out for a little bit before the next session, get something to eat, and get ready for the next session coming up. All right, thank you guys so much for tuning in and for being a part of this. So I really, really appreciate this. Have fun!